everyone. I was doing some garden planning this morning, and then I thought it might actually be helpful if I share the process that I'm going through. So let me know down below if I was correct or not that this is helpful. But what I am doing is basically going through photos from last year's garden at its peak, which for me is usually like end of July through August. I also want to look at September to see where there's some plants that should have lasted that long but didn't. Do I want to replace them? But that's what I'm going to do today with you and the back deck garden. So I just recently posted a 4-year review of my front deck garden, but the back deck, this will be the 3rd year of really having a full garden out there. So I'm going to take you through last year's photos. I will show on the screen the photos I'm looking at on my computer, but I know there are definitely some things that I want to change. So number 1, the first thing that bothered me in the back deck garden was a hole right in the middle of my garden border. So what I call my border is 3 raised beds that are, I think, 17 inches off the ground. And then I usually have a row of pots in front. And 2 years ago, so the very first year, with the 3 beds, I planted mirror image, which I mean, starting from the center, all of this was the same planting and all of this was the same planting. Last year, I did the 2 outside beds the same and then a little bit different in the middle. And with the celosia and cosmos being so tall on the ends, and I don't know if something died or if I just didn't plant anything as tall as those got in the middle, but there was just a hole right in the center. It bothered me all year. I don't know why I didn't fix it or plant something there. So that is what I'm going to do differently this year. I'm going to go back to that mirror image, that they're the same plants in each bed, just so that everything is roughly equal and there aren't any giant holes. Another issue that I had with the border was I didn't think at all about the plant shape, and a majority of what I planted was very vertical. Didn't really go out horizontal much at all, or if it did, just a little bit. Especially the China asters. Those grow very straight and upright. So I think one that did contribute to something looking like a hole in the garden, but also the flowers, I didn't feel like they flowed as well in 2024 as they had the previous year. I really liked how things looked the previous year. It felt like they just all went together a little bit better. It was a little bit more cohesive than this one, although I do love the front pots that I did better last year. So for this back garden border, what I'm going to do differently then, plant the same types of plants in all 3 beds, worry more about shape. So I want to get some that are more like wispy plants and then more that are a little bit structured and add those to the garden. I'm really excited. I have some ideas, but I don't know for sure yet what I'm going to do. But I will take you along with that planning process when we get there. As far as specific plants, I'm not going to do the celosia in the back border. It was the vintage rose celosia from Floret. I loved it. I still have a bunch of the flowers that I dried. I'm going to plant it somewhere, but it took up too much space in the raised beds. It was crowding out the plants next to it. I have never grown celosia this size before, so I didn't realize how vigorous it was going to be. So I think these are probably going to go somewhere else in their own container, or potentially a little bit larger of a raised bed, but I don't want it to take over everything else that is in there. Other plants that I'm definitely including again in this border. So last year was the first year that I put gomphrena in the corners of the beds, and I wasn't sure if I'd like it because the previous year I had supertunias. So they trailed down the sides, but with the pots in front, you couldn't really see them. I love how the gomphrena turned out because it didn't all just grow straight up. It did kind of bush and branch out. I love it. I feel like it kind of created almost the look of a trailing plant, but still stayed upright so you could see it over the pots in front. So gomphrena on the borders is for sure happening again. I am going to keep my China asters in here, probably add them to other beds as well because I love them so much. But I'm not going to do like China aster, China aster, China aster, because again, they all grow so vertical that there are empty spaces in between, and I don't want empty spaces in my garden. I'm also for sure going to do the cosmos again. That I really love the shape of it in the back raised bed, and 2 years ago it didn't do well, so I planted fewer in the border this year and it did do well. What will happen next year? I have no idea, but I am going to put 3 plants back in that border and just see how they do. And then finally, if I do get any holes, I will replace them instead of just being bothered by it every time I look out at the garden. So that's what I'm changing for the back border, that one wall of my garden. Now let's move to what I did last year that I really loved, which is a zinnia and giant dahlia border behind the couch. Now in 2023, I had planted a very low border. There were some hydrangeas, there are caladiums, which I didn't love the look of them in my garden, but because they were maybe only 2 feet high off the ground maximum, you couldn't see them. They got lost behind the couch and all the furniture out there. So I knew that last year I wanted to have taller plants. I love dahlias and zinnias, so I went dahlia, zinnia, all the way down. I believe I had 8 7-gallon grow bags with 1 plant in each grow bag. I loved how it looked until the powdery mildew came super early last year and killed all of the zinnias. They were gone. I think I pulled them in August, which is the earliest I've pulled my zinnias. Usually I can make them last until September. So what I think I'm gonna do differently, even though I love the look of the combination of the dahlias with the zinnias, unless I can think of something else, maybe the celosia, I'm leaning towards just doing all dahlias. So a whole row just of the giant dahlias, and I'm gonna do fewer bags because that's something I remind myself every year and then ignore every year, is that when you start off and the plants are small, it looks like you have more room. But then as the plants grow, they start to crowd each other out. So instead of having 8 grow bags total, I think I'm gonna do 6, and then again, just of the dahlias. So I'm really excited for that. I did have some fungal issues with my dahlias last year, but it wasn't as bad as the powdery mildew that completely wiped out my zinnias. So they still looked pretty good. They started to look like trees a little bit near the end because the leaves on the bottom had fallen off, but they still had flowers and bloomed into November. So since I know that dahlias last me that long in the garden and zinnias might not, I'm just gonna do the dahlias. I'm still gonna have zinnias, but not really in a spot where if they die early, it's very noticeable. Another thing I think I'm gonna do differently from this view is you can see I have 3 planters on the wall. Each of them have 1 Supertunia Vista bubblegum, so you can see how large one plant gets. I absolutely love how this looks. I love the color, I love how full it is. It at some point eventually covers the entire planter, so you just see a ball of flowers. But budworms eat them every year, multiple times a year. And no matter how on top of it I feel like I am, if I'm hand picking them, if I try preventative spray, they're there. So there are times when there are no flowers at all and I have to cut it back and wait for them to rebloom. I'm gonna try to be a bit lower maintenance this year, and because last year the sun patients were full all season long, I didn't have any pest issues on them, I'm gonna replace the Supertunias with sun patients. I think I'm gonna do Orchid Blush, which was a really light pinky lavender color, because I do wanna go for more pastels overall in the garden this year on the back deck. So I'll probably do 2 per planter, and I'm hoping that they just look like that all season, just like they did in the pots last year. I feel like my focus for this year is making maintenance a lot easier while also making my garden look a lot better. So I'm putting those plants that I don't have as many issues with in more spots and limiting the plants that I normally do have issues with. But other than that, I loved it. I loved that I have the height behind the couch with the planters on the railing. I love that I have the dahlias poking over the couch as well. So I liked the setup, but just not 100%. So I'm just gonna swap out a few things and hoping that it's even better this year, even better this year. Let's move around to the next wall. So this is the 3rd wall in my garden, the one that is right up against the house. So this is where it gets the first rays of morning light. I had my bucket planter, which this was the first year. Last year was the first year I had it. I love it. I loved that it gave me more flowers in a vertical space, but I think I am gonna switch up which flowers I plant in it, but I don't know how yet. So let me know your opinion. But last year I had Gomphrena, I had Super Bells, I had Supertunias. What else did I have in there? I had Begonias, I had the Sun Patients, and they all looked great at first until the Supertunias, that I know are very vigorous, took over everything that was next to them. It basically covered up anything that wasn't a supertunia in the 2 bottom rows. Here's where I'm not sure what I want to do though. Do I want to swap out the supertunias and keep plants in there that stay more contained, which means you'll probably see more of the buckets, but you'll be able to see each individual plant? Or do I go crazy and put supertunias in every bucket and create a giant wall of flowers where you probably won't even be able to see the cart? If I had no issues with pests, that's probably the way I'm leaning. I think I'll still keep Gomphrena in the top row though, just for some added height. But I don't know if it's gonna be worth it if the budworms eat all the flowers and then I just have a giant cart of eaten plants. So let me know what you think. Should I just go for it and do a giant wall of supertunias? Or should I go the opposite way and keep it a bit more contained with plants that I won't have an issue with the budworms eating? Let me know your thoughts. Now, behind this is Morning Glory, which I love how it trails up the wall, but it was kind of a hassle to get to it with the bucket planter in front, and the containers that I put it in were very small. So I had to water this one in between the regularly scheduled waterings for my irrigation system. And I think now with the bucket planter, and I do have a 4th raised bed for this year that I have to figure out where that's gonna go, I think I might be over it. I think I'm not gonna do the Morning Glory here next year. It didn't ever flower really, so mostly it's just a bunch of green leaves, which again, I like it. I think it's really pretty, but I don't think I love it, and I think I can use that space more effectively and put plants in there that again won't need as much attention as the Morning Glory. So that's where I'm leaning for that plant. And that's that little corner over there. Now let's look at my hydrangea garden. So on the same wall up against our house, just shifted more to the right around the door, I had 10 or 11 petite hydrangeas. So these range from 1.5 feet at maturity to I think 3 feet at maturity is the largest, tall and wide. I love hydrangeas. Hydrangeas were a plant that I didn't think I was gonna be able to grow in containers. And then when I found the world of compact hydrangeas, I was very excited. I think I wanna keep some of them here. The only issues I had was that on the right-hand side, those blocked the hose, the faucet, so I had to go back in between the plants to turn it on and off or adjust the timer. Again, not a huge issue, but if I can make that just easier and more efficient to get to, I will do that. Also, I'm hoping the hydrangeas will be larger this year, so I don't know if they'll fit all crammed together like this. So I think I'm probably gonna still have some right next to the door, but I will move some more throughout the garden. It's a fine balance because looking at my hydrangeas here, all of them are set up to irrigation. Really anything that's around the border of my back deck garden has irrigation, and anything that's sitting in the middle doesn't, because I don't wanna run drip to the middle, kind of across the deck. So I have to figure out, is it worth having them all on drip and keeping them more up against the door, or spreading out the color of the hydrangeas but having to hand water them? But my goal this year is to have fewer pots not on irrigation, so I'm hoping I can make that happen because that will make maintenance a lot easier. But I'm really excited to have the hydrangeas in the garden. Last year was the first year I planted most of these, a couple, but not the ones in this photo I've had for 2 or 3 years now in the garden. Some of these are sitting in the garage, some are sitting in the greenhouse out on the back deck. But I absolutely loved how this came together. And then turning around one more to get to the final wall of the back deck garden, I loved the combination of plants I had first off. So I had, you can't really tell, try to put up a photo here without the plants this large, but I have 3 wooden flower boxes all along the ground in front of the little fence that blocks off the air conditioning units. Anything I put in front of that fence needs to be able to be moved by me, because if our air conditioner does need maintenance, that fence comes off, so the plants have to be moved out of the way. So I can't put a raised bed there, for example, even though that's where my raised bed is right now, that I need to move in the spring. But in the 3 flower boxes set on the ground, I fell in love with Angelonia. I've never grown Angelonia before. I think the ones I have here are the Angel Face Cascade Pink. They looked like this all year. All year. I did nothing. Again, something that's very low maintenance, but looks beautiful throughout the entire season. So I'm definitely adding more Angelonia. I also had in here some begonias, but the Angelonia kind of took over. Each little bunch you see of the pink is just one Angelonia plant. I also like the growth habit because, again, it wasn't just completely straight up like a lot of my plants were, but it did create a nice mound, so I really like that. But I need to get more of these in more colors into this garden, again, because they looked beautiful without me really having to do anything at all to them. And then in front of them is a row of pots. These are random perennials that I'm keeping. I think a lot of the perennials are going to be moved down to the garage deck. And I don't think I'm going to do, I don't think I'm going to do a low border here. I go back and forth because I did like the look of this, but again, I don't want that many small pots. But this is a hard one for me because I think that maybe the row of hydrangeas, I'll scooch more of them over. Those are easy to move. So maybe I'll do like hydrangea, flower box, hydrangea, flower box, and then not have the row of pots in front. But this is probably the area I'm least sure what I'm going to do with. I do know, you can see in the back there, that there is some black-eyed Susan vine. I do know that I'm not going to plant that there because it was growing through the fence into the air conditioning unit, so I had to make sure that I kept pruning that off so it didn't climb inside. So that's gonna be moved somewhere else, but I really like what I did with that. I think there are 2 plants in there, 2 of the black-eyed Susan vines or Thumbergia, a 19-inch plant cage, and it just created what looked like a bush of white flowers. So I might do that setup again, but not in that area. Now, a change that I kind of want to do just overall to this back deck garden is to go even heavier with the pastel colored flowers. That's kind of how it started, and then when I have random plants left over, I just throw them in there. So, for example, looking at it right now, I almost feel like it's the jazzberry that really pulls your eye, the Supertunia jazzberry in the bucket planter, because that color is so bright. Whereas I think next year, the brightest color I want to go with is the Supertunia Vista Bubblegum, which is kind of just a very true pink color, and then everything else be a little bit more pastel and lighter. And I want it to be pastels of pinks, oranges, and purples. That was the plan for my color scheme last year, and somehow it turned out just mostly pink, which tends to happen in my garden. But as far as the overall look of it, on that too, this is another garden goal I have every year and then ignore. I'm going to give away extra plants that don't kind of fit in my theme. I have a tendency that if I have a plant left over, I will shove it somewhere because I can't let go of it. But then I find I don't really love it because I'm kind of putting it there because I feel like I have to, not necessarily because I want to. And I'm going to try to shift away from that. So any extra plants I'm going to give away. I know a ton of people here that will happily take free plants. So I think that's going to be my plan. Overall, more pastels, hopefully fewer overall pots or smaller containers, and having almost everything set up to irrigation except for, like here, for example, the hydrangeas that were around the table and the Angelonia on the table, and then all of the petunias on the back railing. Those were not hooked up to drip. If I can just have those, again, that's pretty easy to just hand water. So that, I think, is going to be my overall plan for the back deck garden. Oftentimes I make plans and ignore them, but I do feel pretty set with this because I lived with that garden for a whole season. Looking back on it now, I pretty much feel the same way as I did back then. So yeah, I really like spending time just reviewing photos of my garden, again, from what's supposed to be the peak, and see what I liked and didn't like and keep that noted for next year. I also do write these down because my brain, I feel like, gets full very easily, so I don't want to have to constantly just remind myself of what I'm going to do. So I do have a list of this that I'm going to keep and then hopefully stick to those plans for next year. But let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you do something similar as well, and then I will see you in the next video. Bye.